What's going on, everybody? Cullen Gandy here, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about mortgage finance, personal finance, and savings, and just anything having to do with getting you down the line to your financial goals where you want to be. My name is Cullen Gandy, and today I want to talk about a subject that actually I've gotten a lot of feedback from a former video, which awesome. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for liking my videos. And that is more ways to think sort of abstractly in order to pass the SAFE mortgage loan originator test. Now, if any of you guys want to see my last video on this subject that really kind of goes into the details of what each of the individual pieces of information you should be studying are, you can check that out up there. But otherwise, this is going to be more geared towards the mentality going into the process and oftentimes coming back out of the process because, as many of you may know, most people don't pass the SAFE mortgage loan originator test the first try. In fact, I think only about 40% of people pass the test on the first try. But before I get into any of that, if you like content like this that is educational and sort of gets you into gear when it comes to your upcoming career goals or financial goals, go ahead and leave me a like and subscribe and make sure to hit that notification bell so I can bring more stuff like this to you guys and girls, because you know I love bringing you value. Okay, so the first thing that I would recommend when you're going into the mentality of passing the SAFE mortgage loan originator test is oftentimes not the most attractive option, and that is learning from your failures. But not just learning from them, specifically filtering out information that is important in making yourself better when it comes to taking that test maybe the next time, or taking it from the first time, but you've been doing practice tests and things and practice courses. Now, I passed the test on the first try with a fairly good margin for success, as far as I wasn't 2 or 3 points away from losing, but I wasn't in the 90s or 100s either. And that is because I have a very specific way of going about how I learn things, which usually gets me where I need to go, but not necessarily always that much further. Because let's face it, if you pass the test with a 75, it's the same amount of money, hopefully, as passing it with a 100. However, my girlfriend took it 3 times and failed the first 2 times. But each of those 2 times, she got back really valuable information. You see, the first time that you take the test and maybe you fail it, you're going to get a printout of each of the individual subjects that comprise the test. And by that, they just sort of give you a relative grade. That's usually just a word. It tells you whether or not you did adequate, or if you were highly above average, or on par with your other friends, or slightly below average, or way below average, right? Well, if you fail the test initially and you got a 68, let's say, but you go through all of the subjects on the sheet there and you realize that you've got adequate, highly functional, and then one of them, let's say it's ethics, maybe you're just not an ethical type person. I mean, what are you gonna do? It's you're in the mafia or something. You look there and you see that you got a way below average score on the ethics portion. Well, that's valuable information because studying, like most things, takes mental economy. And if you know that you need to provide more nourishment for a certain subject inside of your brain, right? Like in the case of ethics, you can keep doing that and sort of be on maintenance for all of the other subjects. Now, that isn't to say that you neglect any of the other subjects. Keep going through your routine as you would otherwise, but really kick it up and engage with your community, engage with all of your resources to get that one subject back up, because that could necessarily make the difference between whether or not you pass or fail. For example, my girlfriend initially failed, I think, with like a 65. She saw that she had 2 subjects that she was sort of deficient in. She took it the second time. I think she got like a 73 or 74. I mean, it was just like heartbreaking. But she saw, hey, look, I did better in these 3 subjects, but I could have done better on MLO activities or something. No big deal. So we ran through MLO activities like, I don't know, like a boxing trainer or something. And by the end, she got into the 80s when it came to passing the test the 3rd time. Now, the 3rd time is going to be a benchmark because if you do not pass the test on the 3rd time, you're going to have to wait 6 more months. So, try to aim for just a little bit better each time. And by that 3rd try, hopefully you've hit the right buttons to get it right where you want to be. Like my girlfriend always told me when she studied, she would study trying to get a 95, 96, knowing that she's not a very good person when it comes to studying, so that when she got to the test, she would get into the 80s. Learning from your failures is one of the best way to solidify the knowledge in your mind also, because I found out that after Anna passed the test with flying colors, she was able to recite to me a lot of the things that I had long forgotten, months before. And that wasn't just because she had taken it more recently, it's because she had gone over it more thoroughly. So this is something that could really benefit you in the long term as a professional yourselves. Now, the second way that you can make sure you really nail this test, and this has something to do with what I was talking about in the other video on this subject, which has to do with deductive reasoning. But the way I specifically engage deductive reasoning, I like to call filtered reasoning. Now, what does that mean? Well, going through the courses, especially on your primary education, when you gotta take that 20 hours, you sort of see patterns jumping out at you of what seems to be really important, and then what gets gradually more detailed and maybe less important to understand or know. Well, the same applies with test taking. Test taking is sort of a series of understanding of different information that goes from top to bottom. And so what I like to do is I like to compartmentalize each of the individual sections of the test at the highest level and then filter down through there. That way, if you really understand the highest level understanding and you know really, really well the second level and so on and so forth, then you can really understand that, hey, maybe you didn't understand the details as good as you thought initially, but you got so many of the ideas right that you ended up passing the test on your first try. I'll give you an example. With federal regulations, which works really well with this kind of thinking, you have a list of all of these major organizations and acts which govern certain things in your industry. We have RESPA, TILA, HMDA, FACRA. We have organizations like the CFPB and HUD and the VA and the USDA. And if you understand what each of these giant organizations and federal regulations does, then it's not so much of a stretch to understand what could fall underneath them. And when you get a question about something that could fall under their umbrella, it'll be really easy to just hone in on it and know where it comes from. In fact, oftentimes, just knowing what kind of government body is sort of dictating the rules for a certain question can be the answer right there in the test for you. So, in the example, I want you to take RESPA. It governs the timing around and the disclosure of the settlement of real estate exchanges and the procedures around the settlement. You have TILA, which governs a lot of how lenders advertise costs and fees and things to the effect of how we get borrowers to interact with the lenders. And those two work really closely together to give a package of disclosures that makes it really transparent and easy for the borrowers to get through the real estate settlement process and through other credit transactions. Those are called TRID. So if you know, hey, this has something to do with the exchange of real estate, and this has something to do with the disclosure of some kind of cost or some kind of fee schedule, it probably either has something to do with RESPA or TILA. If you know that the disclosures around RESPA are all based on the timing of the settlement of the real estate, then you can understand which parts go when a lot easier. For example, if you know that the disclosure that comes before the closing has to come 3 days, then you know that all of the other disclosures before that, hey, they're not coming 3 days before that, if that makes any sense, right? So definitely look out for the little things that you can hold on to, the big ideas that you can hold on to and break down into smaller pieces. For another example, we have HMDA. If anything has to do with, the keeping of records, especially making more transparent the collection of data and the extension of credit to certain parties, for example, that we show we aren't discriminating against race, ethnicity, or gender, chances are it has to do with HMDA. If it's ECOA, that's the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, there's a lot in there about what we have to do as lenders and as extenders of credit as far as not discriminating against anybody and offering everybody the opportunity on applying for credit. So if it has to do with providing people an opportunity to extend and take on credit, chances are it has to do with ECOA. This is a really big deal when it comes to the 1003. It's very important when it has to do with things like not having disparate impact on a certain group or setting policies that are going to create difficulties for a certain part of your community. That's all within the realm of ECOA there. And then you're going to have other little things that you probably should know about each of the individual acts. For example, the MARS rule, the Mortgage Assistance Relief Services rule. Well, if you know, hey, this is right in the name, it has to do with the mortgage relief services industry, then you'll know that you need to understand what it takes in order to be able to extend mortgage relief services. So if you get a question about a gentleman or a woman that is in default on her loan and wants to sort of change the terms of it, and then gets the idea from a company that a company can come in and promise that they can renegotiate the terms of their loan for a small upfront fee, you'll know that that is not possible under the MARS rule, because under the MARS rule there are a certain set of tasks that you cannot do. Then there's the other really big institutions like the HUD, the CFPB, the VA, and the USDA, and all of their functions. You should know that CFPB, it governs and enforces laws around the protection of the consumer. You want to know that HUD essentially guarantees all of the loans that enable maybe the not most qualified borrowers that go out for FHA loans to get the loans that sometimes they aren't otherwise able to get. And if you know how each one of those interacts, for example, the VA can guarantee loans from the VA standpoint, so if you're a military veteran. So have big ideas associated with each of the federal acts and regulations and their major institutions, and then filter down from there. And then the third way that I'm really able to hammer information into my head and memorize it really easily is sort of a two-part. That is regular word association, and then what I like to call synesthetic association learning. So regular association learning is pretty much like it sounds. If you have to memorize sort of writ large ideas, or if you have to associate certain words with those ideas, then this is a really good thing to just sort of mash them together or replace them with a more memorable term or an anagram. If you're trying to remember what all the regulations that are associated with all of the terms and all of the major laws are, just put them together. Instead of remembering that TILA is Regulation Z, just call it TILA Z or TILAs. I do REXPA for Regulation X on RESPA. Another way that I'm often able to do it is I can associate the actual idea and as little words as I can with each of the laws or each of the ideas in ethics. For example, for red flags, you can do straw borrowers and you can do all of these things. It's really easy to remember because instead of saying, oh, this is a borrower that is applying for a loan that he doesn't intend to habit or pay the loan, you can just say, oh, that's a straw borrower. Well, that works for other information too. For example, for ECOA, I would just think, equal opportunity credit or equal credit. But sometimes even other kinds of things work when it doesn't even make sense. For example, you could just put names out for all of them. Like my dog's name is Ollie. So I could think of RESPA as one of the more important ones and think of it as something that's important to you. For example, Ollie. So what happens to do with Ollie? So every time you think of Ollie, you're going to think of real estate settlement and procedures. I mean, what else would you think of? Now, on the synesthetic end of the association, the reasoning for why that gets into your brain a lot easier is a lot more obfuscated or not as easy to understand. When you're listing out information that you might not be able to easily take in otherwise, it helps to combine mediums in order to take that information in. First of all, the kinetic act for me of writing it down, or kinesthetic act, of writing it down helped me memorize it more than if I was just trying to read it and understand it myself. So I'm combining three different mediums. I'm writing, which helps me memorize, but I'm also reading back on a certain color paper, which helps me memorize and place it in a part of my brain that remembers maybe colors or feelings. I learned this as an opera singer when I would try to memorize music, notes, texts, acting and all of these different things that we have to take in and memorize over 500 or 600 pages. And it occurred to me, one day that it's much easier to memorize this information when I put it all together rather than trying to memorize each individual line of data. That is to say, rather than first trying to memorize the music and then trying to memorize the lyrics and then trying to memorize, your staging or where you're on the stage or who you're collaborating with. I hope some of the methods that I've listed here are a little bit helpful for you guys. I know that they are sort of like big idea methods for studying, but I guarantee you if you employ them and keep at them, you will see results in the short term and potentially in the long term, especially a lot of these where you're combining your senses or you're learning from your mistake in a really intuitive way. These are things that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. I mean, how often do you forget your major mistakes in your life, right? Anyway, everybody, I hope you got some value out of this video. And if you did, again, hit me with that like button. I need your acceptance, as well as the subscribe button and the notification bell. Just ding it for me because I want to notify you of this content. And I'll see you on the other side, hopefully a little bit richer and a little bit happier. Take care.